Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another video for Eve Echoes. And in today's video you're going to witness me pressing the big red self-destruct button on my opinion within the community. Yeah, we're going to be talking about insurance, a topic that people just genuinely don't seem to like me talking about. Now, I kind of get why. This is one of those topics that a lot of people are very passionate about. This community obviously is a strong community filled with people who love this game deeply and want it to succeed. And insurance is one of those topics that people have some very strong opinions about, and, well, I'm here to tell you that those opinions are all wrong. Simply put, the insurance issue is not nearly as simple as people seem to think it is. I think a lot of people simply don't understand the system, they don't understand how it works or why it is the way it is, and I think a lot of the stuff that people talk about just ultimately doesn't actually track when we look into it deeper. It's the boogeyman, it's the scapegoat that people want to look at and explain why the game is failing in regards to industry, and I, alongside the devs, don't actually think that it is. I think also that the misunderstanding of insurance and the repeated demands about it stifle actual meaningful discussion about what insurance is and how we could actually fix the game properly for industry going forward. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do in today's video. Now, I do hope you stick around to the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions at the end of this as well, but I do ask, please wait until the end of the video, because I'm sure that a lot of things that people are going to say, oh, but what about, will be covered. At the end of the video, if I've missed something, let me know. I'd love to continue the discussion in the comment section down below and on the Cat Skull Discord. And as usual, if you like this, please hit that like button. I know it is always so annoying to hear a YouTuber beg about this, but every time you hit that like button, it massively, massively helps my channel in ways that you cannot understand. Anyway, let's go beyond that and let's jump straight into talking about this, because there's a lot to go over today. And first of all then, I think we need to talk about how insurance actually works. Now, first of all, we need to talk about how the buy orders are generated and ultimately things like gift IP. So, insurance as a system, what does it do? How does it work? Well, the design of insurance was to keep combat players playing in the event that they lost their ship, whether that's PvP or PvE. If a player loses their ship, insurance exists to make it easier for them to get back into playing. It means that if someone loses their ship, they are less likely to put the game down and ultimately quit. Before insurance happened, I know there are stories of people saying, oh, you know, I used to undock, I used to go PvPing. Those people, like me, are in the minority. We are not the majority. Those of us who accept that ship loss is a big part of EVE, and those of us who actually enjoy sometimes losing our own ships, like laughing at the explosions, we are the minority. The vast majority of players do not like losing their ships, and insurance is there to help ease that process. So, when you undock a ship, the game looks at the value of that ship, of all its fittings, of the nanocores, everything that's there, and it then generates a cost for this. That cost is then reduced by 70%, and that is then compared to the Plex market as how much IP, insurance points, you actually need to insure that ship. So basically, the amount of IP required to insure a ship is equivalent to about, give or take, 30% of the ship's actual value. Now, on the chance that a ship is destroyed, essentially those gift IP, the 30% of that ship's value, is tallied up and it's sold as Plex and onto the market, and that ISK then is put into a pot, so to speak. And when that pot eventually reaches 100% for other people blowing up that same type of ship, or you losing that ship over and over again, once it hits 100%, a buy order is generated. Now, the cost of a buy order is based on the cost of minerals, and that is where I think a lot of the issues with insurance do come in. We will be talking about that later, however. For now, I want to talk about gift IP, because there are two types of insurance points in the game. You've got the insurance points that you can go onto the market and buy using Plex. Heck, you can just open up the insurance tab and buy insurance points using Plex to make sure that your ship is insured when you undock it. On the other hand, you can also get what is referred to as gift IP through things like previously the daily login reward system, and the Concord Pass, even certain packages in the NES store, and I'm aware that the NES actually is, the S is for store, but anyway, in the NES, some of those packages also include gift IP. Now, gift IP does not count towards the generation of a buy order, which means if you have a ship that is, say, 100 million ISK in its actual value, normally the 30% of that would be 30 million ISK, right, which goes into the pot and fills it up. Now, if you have only gift IP, or if you've still got a ton of gift IP because it's used as priority, then that gift IP is not going to put anything into the pot. It's just the gift IP is destroyed and you get your ship back. Now, this does, to explain, this does work if you have a 50-50. So if you had enough gift IP to cover 50% of the 30%, so 15% of your ship's cost, and the other 15% was covered using standard IP, then that would then, in this case, put 15 million into the pot, rather than the 30 million, which if it was all pure IP. So gift IP does not count towards buy orders. Now, why does it work this way? The simple answer there is because when you lose a ship, you need that, they want you to have the ship back as quickly as possible. That is the point of insurance, that they are trying to give combat players the ship back as quickly as is feasible in order to get them back into the game. And if you generate a ship back with insurance, and you can go back out into whatever anomaly or wherever it was you were destroyed, and if you can loot your wreckage, you've ultimately lost nothing other than the insurance points spent to bring it back. Now, this again causes other issues down the line, but for now, that's why it is the way it is there. When you bring a ship back with insurance, you have destroyed a ship and you have brought a ship back, so you are at 0 loss overall. Now, this is not good for the game. If you're just building ships like this, then there's nothing for the industrial players to actually build. There is no demand for their supply of ships. So what insurance does is it generates those buy orders somewhere else in New Eden so that players can then destroy their ships and ultimately still have that net loss to the game. I've lost my ship, that's one ship down, I get a ship back, so that's one ship up, we're back at 0, then some industrialist over there destroys his ship by feeding it into the insurance system and getting paid for it. That is now back to the -1 that it should be for a ship being lost. Essentially, think of this kind of, if you were to lose a ship without insurance, you go to a friend of yours or a industrial shipbuilder, if none of them are your friends for whatever reason, you buy a ship off them, the game is still one ship down. Just the insurance system helps cut out the middleman, it gives you the ship back first, and then destroys it later on. Now, this means that there are some issues that have been levied against insurance, notably that it does magic up new ships. Now, as I've just explained, that's not actually a problem. The simple point here is that whether or not, if you were to lose your ship and then just go to your favorite shipbuilder and get another one back, you have lost a ship, they have built a ship, and then they have sold it to you. The game is still at a -1 of that particular ship, and the industrialist is still getting paid. With insurance, however, you just kind of cut out the waiting period. You get your ship back, and then they destroy it later when the industrialist fulfills the buy order. That's how it works. You're just ultimately getting the ship back faster, and a ship will still be destroyed later on. Theoretically, at least, because this is where the actual problem is. Nobody fulfills the buy orders. Now, why does nobody fulfill these buy orders? Is it because they're too far away or they're too random? No, there are plenty of shipbuilders based near to pretty much every ITC in the game, and they will fulfill those orders if they're worth it. The trouble is that if you are buying materials and ores, and then you have which have a certain amount of value, then you have to account for the reverse engineering for the blueprint, and you have to account for things like transporting the ship from A to B, and indeed the oven switch on costs. Ultimately, a lot of the insurance buy orders just don't match up to that, especially if you're not making the blueprint yourself. If you're making the blueprint, and if someone else is making the blueprint and sending it to you, then there are transaction taxes involved in that. If you're buying ores from people, there are transaction taxes involved in that, and your profit is just dwindling and dwindling by doing this. Prices are too low, it doesn't account for those taxes in the process, and taxes to get the blueprints, the ores and all of that, those are a loss of profit. Of course, there is also the hauling of the ship to the nearest ITC if you're not already based in one. Now, this is ultimately where some people will say, well, why couldn't it just take whatever's on the market anyway? Because that's exploitable. Allow me to give you an example. Now, imagine you go on a Thrasher 2 roam. You and a load of your friends decide that actually you just want to jump in some Thrasher 2s, fly around space, and blow a load of stuff up. But before you depart, you go onto the market, you buy all of the Thrasher 2s that are there with all of the ISK that you have, you buy every single Thrasher 2 that is on the market, and then you put them back on the market at 2 billion ISK each. Now, you go on your roam, you suicide all of those Thrasher 2s or whatever, and suddenly all the industrialists make 2 billion ISK per Thrasher 2 buy order generated. So for every 3 1/3 ship that gets destroyed, someone has made 2 billion ISK out of Thrasher 2s. Just consider that for a moment. Now, yeah, admittedly, the ITC issue, I've said, there are people who are at each ITC, but to be fair, a lot of these buy orders are pretty empty ITCs. There may be some ship builders at them, but not particularly many. And this is partly due to the fact that players are unwilling to embrace different ITCs. And that causes actually a cascade effect across the board elsewhere as well. By only using Jita in EVE Echoes would cause a rampant competition and price decline. Every single trader in New Eden is in Jita, so you just have the price there being competitive. People will fly to Jita to pick up their stuff, so it's whoever can sell cheapest wins. In EVE Online, you've got a lot of different ITCs that have, the major trade hubs rather, that have been kind of generated organically. Jita wasn't set up by the devs in EVE Online. It is just a station that players chose to sell stuff at. Same with Heck, Dodixie, Amar, Renz. These are all different stations that people are trading at in EVE Online, and they will have massively different prices. You can look at prices in Heck, for example, and see that it's a lot more expensive than it is in Jita, because the larger group of people trade in Jita, so there's a lot of competition, which drives the price down. But in Heck, there's not as much competition, so it may be more expensive. And why is that? Because players will pay that extra rather than make the 19 or however many jumps it is from Heck through to Jita. Because autopilot is slower, you don't land on the gate in EVE Online, it's also not as safe. There's a lot of other factors here, but the simple fact is, by having everyone in one central market, competition is rife and prices get pushed down, which makes it very difficult to be an industrialist for the most part anyway. Essentially, only the top players can sell since they've got the lowest cost and can therefore undercut everyone else, or people who do it as a side gig can afford to undercut it, because screw it. If I'm going around and I've got an auto salvager on and I'm looting some stuff and I'm reprocessing it, I'm not really spending time mining to generate that. It's sort of an additional. So I can actually afford to sell it cheaper than the actual miners are, because it's just something that I generated as extra. My ISK generation was through the combat, through the encounters, through the bounty ticks, that kind of thing. I can afford to undercut with the goods that I'm selling on the market. Industrialists and miners who that is their bread and butter cannot, and that's a problem. Now, of course, this also doesn't account for the fact that buy orders are based on a failing ore market. Currently, the price of ores is crashing, and considering that ores and mineral prices are dropping like a rock through the thinnest of atmospheres, ultimately, it means that the buy orders which are generated based on those costs are also cheaper. So if you are actually trying to make ships and transport them and all this kind of thing, and the profit is then being eaten by taxes and transport costs and so on, by the time you get to market, because the ores themselves are so, worthless on the market, but they still take your time and energy to harvest, or to buy from your friends and things like that, you're left with a situation where you've already got some very tight profit margins, and the actual value that the game is putting the ship at, because of a failing ore market, is lower than you'd like it to be anyway. We need to ultimately get a system where the ores become a lot more expensive in EVE Echoes. We need the ore market to stabilize and even strengthen. Right now, they are plummeting in value, and I know a lot of people have argued this when I've talked about ore and mining and that in previous videos, that, it's not all about making ISK. Heck, I'll be the first person to say this game is not all about making ISK, but if you're an industrialist, that is your playstyle. Making ISK is the only thing you do. You don't get to see the big explosions and things like that. You are doing what you do to make money. It is as simple as that, and it's the same with mining. So when you have a market that ultimately is falling apart, yeah, you can sit there and say, oh, I mine just to gather materials to build the ships. And so having something that mines faster, it doesn't matter to me that the market crashes because we now have orcas and rorquals and things like that. Ultimately, the fact that the market is crashing doesn't just affect the ore prices, it also affects the prices of the ships, and considering a significant portion of ship cost is hard ISK, and that cannot be reduced, it means that profits get absolutely neutered on this. So this is not just a simple fix. This is not one of those things you can just kind of click your fingers and bam, it's all fixed. It's not just, oh, change it to ISK. It's not just do this or do that. There are so many little parts that need to be tweaked and tuned to make the whole machine work. You can't just have a car breakdown and go, oh, well, I just need to change this one thing. If there's a lot wrong with it, changing one problem doesn't fix the vehicle. You've got to change all of the broken parts in order to get it working properly. Now, the thing is that none of this is Insurance's fault directly. Lance.Dot has talked about this during the recent AMA. Someone asked about insurance, and he basically said, we don't think insurance is the biggest problem in the game. Insurance is part of it, yes, but the biggest problem that the game has is a lack of consumption. And yes, the way that insurance is generating ships and then the buy orders aren't lucrative enough means that there is a lack of consumption there. But even if you scrapped insurance completely, you wouldn't fix the issue, simply because high-sec islands are still a thing. And again, I don't want to go too much into this one, that's a whole separate video topic for me to talk about. High-sec islands are where you can go to a place like Claralam or some of the others, I'm not going to list them all here. And you just sit in one system, and you can rat totally safe anomalies with no PvP and no having to move around, and because you can pretty much AFK those missions, you can make a decent amount of ISK in complete safety. It's not as much ISK as you'd earn in low-sec or null-sec, but it is completely safe for you to do so, which means you've got players who are just generating ISK. They have the ship that they want, it's fully fitted, it's got all of the modules it wants, they've upgraded that to the point that they're happy with, they've probably got a spare ship already built and set up just in case, but now everything's just a high score. They're not losing anything, they're just generating ISK, which causes inflation, and not actually spending it because there's nothing for them to buy, because they never have to lose a ship. If you don't have to replace your ship ever, that's not insurance. I'm not even saying that they replace it and nothing gets generated because of insurance. I'm saying they don't lose the ship to begin with. That is a problem. And the amount of ISK that they're generating is also a problem, and you could change high-sec islands. I think there needs to be some kind of AFK-able content in this game. If you just completely obliterated high-sec islands and made it completely impossible to do low-effort PvE in the game, then a lot of players are just going to leave, and the dwindling community just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. That is a bad thing for the game. There needs to be a certain AFK-able sort of aspect to the game, but I think they should widen how the systems generate so that you have to travel further. That eats into your ISK per hour because you have to jump between systems. Things like that. I think there's definitely options available to sorting out high-sec islands. The simple point there is that it's not the best ISK in high-sec, but it's close enough, and there's no risk involved at all. Even without insurance, many players just aren't buying new ships. They're hoarding ISK, and it's the same problem as why scanning was added to fix storylines. So again, how to fix this? Well, first of all, when you fix anything, there is a necessity of caution. This game has a very fickle community, and it's not good at getting new players in. Getting new players into EVE Echoes is a difficult thing because this game is so complex. Not only is it complex, it's also niche. There's not a lot of people in the world who want to play an open-world space sandbox game like EVE in the first place. And then you've got to find those people who want to do it, and you've got to help them stick around long enough to actually stay in the community so they don't just go, oh, this game looks awesome, and then bounce off it because it's too complex for them. We have that issue, which means we have to be careful not to scare our existing players away. So if you were to scrap insurance, players are going to leave because it's not worth it anymore to them. Now, you can't add high-sec PvP for that same reason. In EVE Online, yeah, you can kill someone in high-sec. Along comes Concord and blows you up, but you can do things like suicide ganking, have friends with you to loot the wreckage after, cheap ship blows up big ship, profit. I don't think adding that to EVE Echoes is going to be a good idea because it will cause a mass exodus from the game. You can't nerf the high-sec islands too hard because, again, AFK content does need to exist. That is something that this community has shown that it wants. Do I agree with that? No. Listen to any of my dev Q&A videos where they talk about adding stuff that makes it easier for the game to be AFKable. I don't agree with AFKing a game like this, but at the same token I accept that that is what a large percentage of the player base wants, therefore we must accommodate it. We can accommodate it without making it the most lucrative option. And that's the key point here, that we need to nerf high-sec islands without breaking them, if that makes sense. That people who want to be completely AFK and totally safe in high-sec can still earn ISK, just not at such a similar rate to those who are taking risks out in low-sec and null-sec. Now, this ultimately comes down to the fact that having a broken game is better than having a dead game. Having a few problems in EVE Echoes that are proving difficult to fix is better than a rush fix that just breaks the game completely and then all of us leave because it's just not fun anymore. It's a fine line. Ultimately, you need to make sure that things are getting fixed, but you've got to be cautious enough to make sure that those are the right fixes. So talking about right fixes, let's immediately flip that and talk about wrong fixes. ISK. The common one that everyone talks about is ISK. That, actually, yeah, they should totally have it so that the game just gives you ISK when you lose your ship, rather than replacing the ship. This is a bad idea. This is a very bad idea. Ultimately, it doesn't fulfill that design intent of getting combat players back into the game quickly. In fact, ISK isn't really a problem for most people. I think a lot of players out there have more than enough ISK that if they lost their ship, they could just buy it back. The trouble is that you then have to go, right, I've lost my ship, let's dock up, let's contact whoever to build me a new ship. He says, yeah, he can do it, it's just going to take him 4.5 hours. I've got to wait 4.5 hours, screw it, I'll just come back tomorrow, and you're out of the game. You're not having fun anymore. That loss has suddenly become massive because it's pushed you out of the game for the rest of the day. You can't go back into it. Heck, if you didn't have the ship builder, the alternative of that is, great, I've just lost my ship, well now I need to fly to G to buy a new one fit in. Oh, I can't be bothered. I'll come back later. The idea of insurance is to stop that happening, and so scrapping insurance would make that start happening again, and giving ISK as the payout for insurance makes that happen. Now, EVE Online, yes, I know EVE Online uses ISK. 1, the devs themselves have said they hate it. 2, even if they didn't hate it, EVE Online is a different game with a different community. The fact that it takes so long to travel around, the fact that there are so many stations around that are selling. Heck, if you go into Heck as a system and just have a look at the market, there are like 4 or 5 stations in Heck that appear on the market. Then you go to Jita, and again, if you open up the regional market, there's just so many different options because of how that game works, and that game is not EVE Echoes. Maybe we could have an ISK-based system if the people were actually trading at different ITCs, if there were a fully functional corporation market out in nullsec and things like that, but there aren't, so we can move on from ISK. It is never going to happen, and every time someone does this, the brain dead line of, well, they just need to change it to ISK and magically everything will be fixed, you're kidding yourselves at best, and you're just being idiotically ignorant at worst. It's not going to happen. The devs have clearly stated it's not going to happen. I want to state now, I'm not calling anyone who says that an idiot. I'm just saying you are being idiotically ignorant. Open your eyes, look at the situation. It is not that simple. You can't just add ISK. It doesn't fix anything. It would actually break the game even more. Think about it. Don't want a ship? Well, fine, just blow it up and get the ISK back. Oh no! You couldn't cycle your ships into ISK. It becomes so exploitable, so ridiculously stupid. You can't do it. ISK just does not work. And people say, oh, but, if I'm blowing up my ship and then I can just, funnel that ISK into... At least I'm paying an industrialist, right? Well, yeah, and it helps them short term, but it causes rampant inflation over the long term because you can buy all of this stuff and then basically blow it up to get the ISK back, and if you decide you don't want it, and even then you don't necessarily have to replace it. That's the short-sighted point here, that if you have 10 ships and you blow them all up, except for one, because you've decided you only want to fly that one, the other 9, that ISK is not going into some industrialist's pocket. It sits in yours. Now, moving on, the other side of this as well is that we do need to start embracing new ITCs. Now, ITCs aren't a thing in EVE Online, as I said. The trade stations actually formed naturally, and some have even shifted. There are some places that used to be trade hubs that just aren't anymore. Keynote here, Ulai used to be a massive trade hub early on in the game, and then Jita is the one that overtook it. And that was a natural thing, but in Echoes, we have these sort of suggested ITCs. They are the stations that the developers have said, we want you trading at these, and that's fine. That can work as a system. I may personally prefer the whole sort of more natural player-driven approach of, well, we decided we like these stations, these are the ones we're going to trade from, but if the devs want to say, these are the trading markets, that's fine. That can work, but there needs to be a reason to use the other ones. And as it stands right now, the fact that we have completely safe HiSec, the fact that we have offline autopilot, and the fact that both lowsec and HiSec have increased warp speeds means it's just no bother to get to Jita. So the whole, oh, I buy local because it's so annoying to make the 19 jumps to Jita, that doesn't happen. If you're based out of Istadard, for example, down in Malden Heath, it's not a huge issue for you to just autopilot through to Jita, pick the stuff up you need, and then set an autopilot back. In EVE Online, it's a massive ball ache to do that, so you'd just rather buy at your nearest station, even if it's more expensive. So we need to have another way of incentivizing people to use different ITCs, and the best example I've had of this, an idea I've pitched numerous times to people, and for the most part, the community seems to love this, and it's something I really, really wish the devs would give me a solid answer on, of a yes, we like this, or a no, we don't like it, because. And this is that you could lower taxes on certain goods. If you want to sell at a station, make it so that that station has lower taxes on certain items. Now, this could be as simple as keeping things within region. So, for example, you have a look at what the pirates are in that region. If you are selling in Malden Heath or Heimatar, because those are Angel, then look at what they drop. Anything that has Republic Fleet in the name. Anything that is like cannons or afterburners, Webifiers, anything that drops in the loot pool from the Angel Cartel anomalies should have lower taxes. And that goes for things like the different auxiliary rigs and that kind of stuff as well. Then if you go all the way out to Amar, then same thing, because Amar is Blood Raider, then anything Imperial Navy, anything that has Nosferatu or lasers or stuff like that, again, if it's found in a Mar space, have lower taxes on selling it in a Mar space. Now, this does create some weird situations, perhaps. Like Maspa, for example, you get like the lasers, but you also get afterburners because it's Sancha and shields and stuff like that. But to me, that's good. It adds some diversity. There's a reason to go to different stations. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be based on the pirates' loot that's around there, and I do also just want to clarify that when I say anything with Imperial Navy in the name, what I mean is, for example, if you can find an Imperial Navy Nosferatu, then all Nosferatus should have lower taxes, even like the Upir and the moats and things like that. There is not an Imperial Navy Stasis Webifier, for example. There is, however, a Republic Fleet Stasis Webifier. So the Republic Fleet Stasis Webifier means that any Stasis Webifier, whether it's Mark 1, whether it is the full-on Predator, gets a tax reduction in Minmatar stations, and things like that. That's the concept I'm going for here. I think that it should be based on the pirates because it's simpler that way, but you might also just turn around and say, well, actually, Maspa, being halfway between sort of Minmatar and Amar, some things like lasers and cannons are lower taxes in both. You could have it so that because it's halfway between the two, and it's the whole Amatar mandate, that anything that would be reduced tax in Pater and anything that is reduced tax in Amar is also reduced tax in Maspa, but at a lower rate. So, for example, if it's 5% reduced tax, off the top of my head, 5% reduced tax on all the Minmatar stuff in Pater, 5% reduced tax on all of the Amar-related stuff in Amar, then in Maspa, which is in the Amatar mandate between the two, then everything that is related to either Minmatar or Amar is instead at a 2% tax deduction. To me, that gives you a reason to shift ITCs and start using these. I think that hauling contracts need to be added to the game to allow us to actually move stuff across the galaxy, so I can buy stuff in Jita and then have it shipped down to wherever. I think that's an important thing that we should really have in the game, and that allows us to actually have hauling corporations that are known across the cluster, which means that us in Void, we set the particular hauling company to blue, and people out in Delve set that hauling company to blue, and Fountain, certain people will set that to blue so that they know that these are the people who we send our contracts and deliveries to. We don't want to accidentally shoot them, right? And I think that's an interesting way of doing that, at least. Hauling contracts would really, really help. I think you could also ask people that within their entire region, you could sell to fulfill buy orders at any station within the region. So if you have a buy order generated in into Jita, which is part of the Forge, then any other station, you can dock at any station in the Forge and complete the buy orders that way. That would allow people to not require as much distance. There's so many little things, I think, with insurance that could be done to help it and industry in general. And the two biggest ones to me are making it so that the buy orders are more lucrative, so that there is a reason to fulfill those buy orders, and spreading players out across multiple ITCs. Those to me are the two big ones when it comes to insurance. Spread across multiple ITCs, more lucrative in regards to the buy orders. But in order to do those, we then need to look at things like, setting a baseline for ores, so improving the ore market, adding ore sinks, adding a base cost of ore to the valuations and things like that. I think that's a good place to start there. There's just so much underneath all of this. You can't just click your fingers and fix insurance. There are so many other little stages beneath it that all need to be fixed. And I think that's pretty much it. I've covered all the points I have on my little bullet point list here. I've probably rambled off on the side more than I would have liked to, but hey, this is Captain Benzie, that's what I do right. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions on this one as well. I think ultimately, it's not an easy fix. This is a complicated fix, and there's a lot of moving parts the developers are very reluctant to touch, because you can't just go, oh, well, all buy orders plus 5%, because suddenly that becomes exploitable in other ways as well. So you've got to tweak this gently and slowly, and at the same time, little tweak here, see what happens, little tweak there, see what happens. This is why I still think that getting 2 balance updates a year is a bad thing. We should just have minor tweaks every single maintenance. If there is a problem, change something in maintenance and see how it happens over the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. See if that makes a difference, and if it makes a difference, keep it. If it doesn't work, perhaps tweak something else or tweak it further. And if it breaks something else, you can always then turn it backwards, because it's only a week or 2 until the next maintenance. Anyway, folks, those are my thoughts and opinions. Please do let me know yours in the comment section down below. Hopefully this hasn't been too rambly for you. Thank you for listening right the way through to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.